O Rio de Janeiro continua lindo.
Brazil,
Continua sendo.
doing the economic samba, dancing to the music of change. Brazil, like you've never seen it before.
Emerging Powers is made possible by the Ford Motor Company, where quality is job one.
Emerging Powers is supported by IBM.
With additional funding provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the annual financial support of viewers like you.
Hello, I'm Consuelo Mack of the Wall Street Journal. Standing here in New York, it is easy for us Americans to think that we will always be at the center of the economic universe. But as capitalism takes root around the world, countries that were once insular are now adapting to global competition, and some are emerging with new economic power. Tonight, we visit one of the most dynamic of these countries, Brazil. Brazil has been called the country of the future for as long as anyone can remember. But today, many people believe that future is about to arrive. And when it does, one thing is likely: it will be uniquely Brazilian. Nearly everything in Brazil, both the good and the bad, can be described in superlatives. You may know Brazil has the world's best soccer team, but that's just the beginning. This is the world's largest sports stadium, the world's largest iron ore mine, the leading producer of orange juice, and the world's fastest growing computer market. The biggest divide between rich and poor. One of the globe's most important environmental challenges. All in the world's fifth largest country. A country going through dramatic changes, where energy and passion brim over. Seen through the eyes of Brazil's best-known television correspondent.
Hello, I'm Pedro Bial. For the past 7 years, I've been based in London, reporting on world events for Brazilian TV. But for the past few weeks, I've been back to my own country, traveling up and down Brazil, talking to business leaders, to farmers, to musicians, to people on the streets, to politicians, even to the president. And it was a fascinating journey, a journey of rediscovery, a trip that brings up the question, is Brazil an emerging power?
Brazil's best-known export may be music. Bossa Nova, Tropicalismo, Samba. The Girl from Ipanema alone sold 2 million copies in the United States. Now there's a new girl from Rio, Marisa Monte. Her latest album was brought out simultaneously in 48 countries worldwide.
I think the world is becoming smaller and the borders are becoming closer. I already see the fact of singing abroad as naturally as doing a tour of Brazil. Through the music, there's an international and even a world language, a dialogue, even if we're not speaking in the same idioms.
Marisa Monte's music, like all Brazilian music, has its roots in Brazil's past. In the Northeast, in Bahia.
Uma noite linda, a você me entreguei.
the rhythms, the sounds, take one back into a cruel part of Brazil's history. The first Africans had come as slaves. They were brought to Brazil in 1549, when the Portuguese sailed into the harbor and founded the first colonial capital, Salvador da Bahia. As in the US, the Africans were used to work the plantations, but unlike in the States, they managed to maintain much of their distinctive heritage. The city has grown to 2 million inhabitants, but the oldest section, Pelourinho, still survives. It's a center for the African Brazilian community, and for years it has carried some of the worst legacies of slavery. Olodum began in this ghetto as a carnival group. It became famous for its music and evolved into a catalyst for change. It started youth bands, and soon it seemed as if all the kids wanted to play. But they are only allowed to drum if they go to school. The band brings a discipline to their lives, and the children know better than to arrive late. Sandra is just 14, and she's already been playing for 4 years.
I would say that this music is the expression of a multiracial society, and it's genuinely Brazilian. It's influenced by jazz, blues, salsa, reggae, rock, but the way we do it makes it genuinely Brazilian.
Olodum's music attracted artists like Paul Simon and David Byrne. And before long, other musicians and tourists started coming from all over the world. In a way, what happened with the music, this opening up of Brazil internationally, mirrored what we'll see later taking place in Brazil's wider economy. The local energy and enthusiasm encouraged the state to raise funds for restoration, and in 3 years, an impoverished ghetto was transformed into a vibrant neighborhood. Sandra's family were among those who benefited. They had known real poverty. Her mother once had to live on the streets. But the economic changes in Pelourinho have enabled her family's status to improve. Today, her father owns a thriving bar, and Sandra's experience with Olodum has helped to raise her ambitions. What do you expect from the future? What kind of dreams do you have?
I want to study computer programming. Then I want to go to law school. That's all one thing. That's my education. I also want something else. I really want to be a music conductor. And maybe someday I will.
The African Brazilians and the Portuguese were the first immigrants. But like in the United States, Brazil became a magnet for people from all over the world seeking their fortunes. They came from Japan, Germany, Italy, Spain, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. And much of the country's energy is derived from this extraordinary ethnic diversity. But who knows which group is responsible for fortune-telling parakeets?
It says, save your money and don't spend it and waste it as you've been doing up to now. If you do it as I'm saying, you'll be happy all your life.
Few nationalities have prospered more than the Japanese. Most arrived in the 1920s as farm laborers on the coffee plantations. But within a generation, many, rather like the country itself, moved from agrarian to urban lifestyles, from peasant farmers to professional and business leaders. And today, the largest Japanese city outside of Japan is São Paulo, Brazil's economic center. It's in São Paulo, the world's third largest city, that you first appreciate Brazil's economic explosion. Maximilian Filho started São Paulo's annual computer fair, FenaSoft, 10 years ago, when Brazil had an embargo on foreign technology. Since Brazil opened up its markets to foreign computer companies, FenaSoft has grown into the world's largest computer expo, and Brazil has become the world's fastest growing computer market.
If you make a year's projection based on the last quarter, we're going to reach sales of 1 million computers. Last year, we sold 400,000 computers, so it's a big jump.
How many at FenaSoft?
I believe somewhere between 150 and 200,000 machines will be sold right here.
Nearly all the international companies have moved in. Compaq, IBM, and Hewlett-Packard have all set up factories.
These people, Brazil, we have to have an installed base, at least 10 million PCs in the next 3-4 years.
But Brazil is not just a receiver of foreign technology.
We produce more software than Japan. Brazil produces more software than Japan. 20% of the software that we use in our country is Brazilian produced. So we are very strong in that area. We are not that strong in the hardware side, where you need a lot of technology and a lot of projects. But on the intelligence side, where you need really, creative people, we are one of the best countries in the world. Even countries that are very conservative, little by little are doing some investments in Brazil.
Computer companies are among the more recent firms to appreciate the size of the Brazilian market. But they can only sell to the prosperous, a relatively small section of Brazil. To see a company that has been able to tap into the wider consumer market, a population of 150 million potential customers, I flew over 1,500 miles to the port of Manaus, on the edge of the rainforest. The Amazon has always attracted explorers, pioneers, gold diggers of all sorts. When Avon Cosmetics decided to move into Amazonia, many financial experts thought the company was crazy. After all, Amazonia is a wilderness with few banks, few major employers, and only a primitive transportation infrastructure. But it turned out to be a shrewd business decision.
There are lipsticks there. You can look anywhere on this river, inside the jungle, in the forest, and for sure, all female Indians are using Avon lipstick.
Eliana Machado da Silva is a regional sales manager. She has offered to take me to see one of her star saleswomen. Iraci Macedo Queiroz has been selling Avon for 30 years. She's one of 400,000 so-called beauty consultants in Brazil. It's a sales force that is twice the size of Brazil's army. Iraci is a retired school teacher and the main breadwinner in her family. They all, even her husband, help to sell. Ana Cláudia, do you intend to continue the work of your grandmother? Are you planning to sell Avon?
Yes.
You like it, don't you?
She wants to be a doctor, but will continue to sell Avon.
Avon's foresight was not only in realizing early on that the developing world offers some of the last untapped markets, but in understanding that, for country folk, it's hard to get access to consumer goods. Direct selling through catalogs offered a means of opening up these new markets.
Who are your customers? Can they afford to buy Avon?
Many of them come here and they propose an exchange. They're poor, but they still have a chicken in their backyard, flour, or something to offer.
Iracy carries a seductive array. Mesmerized cologne, hot cinnamon lipstick, paradise pink blush, and forever fragrance. The company's sales in the Amazon have soared over recent years, growing 50% annually and helping to develop this unexploited mass market by bringing more people into the consumer economy. For Iracy, it's meant relative prosperity. If she was still a school teacher, she would earn 100 reals. That's about $110 a month. Instead, she says she now makes 7 to 8 times as much. The sales system may seem primitive, but the fulfillment is sophisticated. Iracy's orders are transmitted via computer 2,500 miles away to Avon's headquarters in São Paulo.
Avon is the leader in the market here in Brazil and in the 10 countries in South America. Practically 99% of the products sold in Brazil are produced here in this factory. Cosmetics are purely about dreams. It is because of this that Avon is so powerful, because she is a big factory of dreams.
Sales are expected to reach more than $1 billion this year. Reaching such a mass market takes more than just door-to-door selling. Little of it would probably have happened without the big dream maker, television. TV is everywhere in Brazil, thanks in part to the military dictatorship of the 60s and 70s, which saw it as a means of uniting and controlling this massive country. And it was a single station, TV Globo, the company I work for, that became the dominant force for whetting consumer appetites. Since its formation in 1965, the Globo network has grown into the world's largest producer of TV shows, and it dominates the Brazilian market.
I have a sense that in many poor places, the TV is a magical instrument. In Brazil, it has become a culture. This is a people that even today are not very developed. They see someone smoking what they don't smoke, a car they'll never have, an apartment they'll never be able to have, a woman they can't have, and this gives them a place to dream.
The telenovelas, or soap operas, exploit the public's interest in love, sex, and tangled human relationships, and are sold to even the most surprising countries.
I think it's because they're so well made, and because there's something in them for everyone. For example, Fidel Castro loves Brazilian soap operas. They're edited, dubbed, and then sold all over the world.
This is my final word. From the moment our son returns, Isaura eats in the kitchen together with the other slaves.
Today, at a Rio de Janeiro studio, the carpenters, prop people, actors and directors are getting ready to record an episode of a pioneering interactive TV program. Every week, You Decide tells a story that requires its central character to make a moral decision.
When the issue involves really important decisions, decisions that we as Brazilians have to take all the time. If we are going to pact with violence or not, if we are going to denounce a crooked way of doing things, or if we are going to profit of it. This is an important Brazilian issue.
In this episode, a young woman who has been raped has to decide whether to run down the man who had raped her. But it's not the woman who decides what to do. It's the television viewers who are invited to vote by telephone. More than 80,000 people vote by telephone every week. Crowds gather in televised town square meetings all over Brazil to give their opinions.
I think that every viewer is a critic, everyone has an opinion. Especially in our country, where the people don't have an active voice because they only get to vote in the elections. And this is an opportunity for the people to express their sentiments and to give their opinions.
You Decide demonstrates not only the power of TV in Brazil, but also the international appeal of Brazilian creativity. The format has been sold to 45 countries, including Britain, China, and the USA. 600 miles from Rio, a more traditional Brazilian economic export, agriculture, is also showing an ability to modernize and compete internationally. Cambuí Farm is a leading producer of oranges and coffee and rubber, and until recently, beef.
The auction that we're going to now, that we're going to just terminate all the cattle business that we have, it is like turning a page that is never going to go back.
Agora, R$105 apenas, que pouco dinheiro, vale mais, R$105 apenas questionando, buscando.
Cambuí once had 15,000 head of cattle. By tomorrow, the farm hopes that the last steers will be sold off. And with the help of some traditional lubrication, it's doing its best to encourage the neighboring farmers to bid enthusiastically. The auction is all part of a long-range master plan to produce one of the world's most efficient and cost-effective farms. The man behind the plan is not exactly a traditional farmer.
I'm a lawyer, and I graduated, and I also took an MBA program and worked in insurance most of my life, so financial investment. I've lived in Los Angeles, California. I lived in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I lived in Wilmington, Delaware. I lived in New York. I lived in Lisbon, in Portugal. Then I lived in Rio. And then I moved to Matão.
The 34,800-acre farm is run by Rogério Braga. Using the management techniques he learned at an American business school, Braga has increased the yield per tree to more than twice Brazil's average. The productivity of his workers is closely measured every day, and every orange they pick is tracked by a computer system.
Being a commodity business, what you have to worry is about cost and productivity. Concern yourself with being the lowest unit cost producer. And whatever the market price is, you're still going to be better than your competitor, which is the next door guy or the next country guy that produces the same product.
In the past, farmers and business people in countries like Brazil believed that cheap labor would always enable them to undercut prices on the international market. Today, that's changing.
I don't think companies in Brazil today, at least not the modern companies, operate under the belief that Brazil will be forever competitive based on cheap labor, especially now when you have Southeast Asia or even some products that we compete with Africa in coffee or or even with Central America, you cannot claim to be competitive worldwide just based on cheap labor. We at Cambuí, since the mid-'80s, understood that if we were to be competitive in the long run with low prices, we would have to work with a labor force that was well-trained, well-paid, with a smaller workforce, but better trained and better paid, so that they're more satisfied and they have a higher productivity. The company is making money on that operation, and he is getting benefits that he would not get someplace else.
The developments at Cambuí are impressive, but as in other parts of the world, the smaller, more traditional farmers are having a harder time. The farm next door was settled in the 19th century by an Italian immigrant. Until recently, his descendants had 60 workers. Today they have none. Instead, the Daura family gets up at 5 a.m. and does all the work themselves, from herding the cattle to inoculating the calves. They say that a lack of capital makes it hard to compete.
The situation of the farmer is the following. My wife has a degree in livestock management from the University of UNESP. She tells me we need to do so-and-so on the farm. I tell her, I can't. Everything you've learned is good, but I can't follow it. Why? Because if I take the money I have that is for us to live on and invest it in what she wants, I won't have any money left.
The farmers are clearly frustrated and look enviously at Cambuí's financial resources. Cambuí made a decision to become vertically integrated, to not only grow oranges, but to process and market them too. Now the farm, or agribusiness, boasts one of the most efficient and sophisticated frozen orange juice plants in the world. It already processes 4% of Brazil's orange juice exports. Now Cambuí is investing a further $22 million to double the plant's capacity and help reduce unit costs. The company is seeking to expand its share in a worldwide market that is already dominated by Brazil. To understand why Cambuí is able to be so aggressive, you need to visit São Paulo. It's 9:30 at night, and at the top of a bank building, Rogério the farmer is operating in a setting where he's totally at home. Cambuí is owned by Brazil's third largest private bank, Unibanco. And this is where all the major decisions are made, not down on the farm.
Farming will not survive in the long run if it continues to be a self-contained business that doesn't look into the world trade, into the world trend of things, and certainly it's not a business that is going to be surviving forever on the pity of the society. Brazil in general still has a lot of catching up to do, and things such as the World Trade Organization, which will continuously force for trade barriers to be lowered, will force farmers to understand that they have to be competitive. It's going to be a painful, long process.
And it's not going to be a straight and even road. Instead, we will face many obstacles. But we Brazilians are by nature optimistic, always looking to the future, always dreaming. People everywhere, of course, have dreams. But the difference between Brazilians and other people is we bet on our dreams. I dreamed about President Fernando Henrique last night. On which animal should I bet?
Our president is very vain, so you should bet on the peacock, which is a vain and beautiful animal.
The zoo lottery, or Jogo do Bicho, is an illegal gambling game that nearly all Brazilians play. Today, the Jogo do Bicho is far more popular than the official government lotteries. Some people say because it is run by crooks who always pay out, as opposed to government officials who no one trusts. The big-time gambling goes on at the São Paulo Stock Exchange. It's the most important stock market in Latin America, with $15 billion in foreign investments. Small wonder that passions run high. This market has become much more active than it was a few years ago. One big reason: the gradual opening up of Brazil's nationally owned industries, such as steel and telephones, to foreign investment and competition. These industries were controlled for years by a wealthy elite who are being forced to loosen their grip.
Today, the Congress does not look around at the country's elite, which consists of a small number of people who wish to keep the status quo, their privileges. The Congress looks for what is beyond this audience, which is the Brazilian people who wish for something different. People who wish to have a home telephone, better services, who want things to get going. People are not concerned about the fact of whether or not Telebras is state-owned. They just want to have a telephone line. And this is understood now, thank God.
Despite the optimism, it is hard to judge whether Brazil's Congress is more in touch with the people's wishes. The relationship between the politicians and our people is often distant, like our capital, Brasilia. It was built during the industrial expansion of the late 50s, hundreds of miles from the coast where there was nothing before. The idea was to help open up the vast interior. Our most famous architect, Oscar Niemeyer, described his great planned city of the 20th century in typically Brazilian terms. I sought the curved and the sensual line, the curve that I see in the Brazilian hills, in the body of a loved one, in the clouds in the sky, and in the ocean waves. What happened? Brasilia was built trying to be democratic, with open spaces to allow people close to the corridors of power. Four years later, the military marched in. The dream of democracy was lost. During the dictatorship, state and nation, government and people grew apart. Ironically, it was this separation, not democracy, that the distant Brasilia came to represent. When Brazil finally got democracy back in 1989, the people elected a man who promised to reform the country, but turned out to be as corrupt as all the others. Well, at least we impeached him. The economy was now growing, but the country's inflation was way out of control, reaching 40% per month. When the new economics minister introduced a new currency, the real, few people thought it would stem the tide. But Fernando Henrique Cardoso surprised them all. Inflation plummeted and this time stayed down. In October 1994, he was swept into office as president. Since then, he has won wide international respect, opening up Brazil's markets to imports, attracting foreign investment, and clamping down on corruption.
We are seeing at the moment great transformations in thinking. This is what is making the conditions for us to make positive changes in our economy.
Are you satisfied with the pace of the privatization program?
No, because it has stalled. Only now are we restarting it. I think we have to accelerate the speed of the program, but not at the expense of honesty, of accountability to the public trust.
To understand what a revolution privatization represents, you have to understand what the national industries symbolize and how important they are to Brazil's identity and sense of national pride. One of the most important nationalized industries was steel. The government had built a giant nationally owned steelworks, Companhia Siderúrgica Nacional, or CSN, and it became symbolic of Brazilian industry. Brazil would control its own destiny, its own steel, car factories, telephones, energy, and not be dependent on the big powers. Sadly, CSN also became symbolic of what went wrong with so many Brazilian industries: corruption, bureaucratic inefficiency, and a lack of capital investment. By the 1980s, the plants were torn apart by strikes. The strikes were usually over conditions and pay, but they became highly politicized, and 3 people died in the struggles.
I was the Director General of the big strike in 1984, the first strike we were involved in at CSN.
The strike was part of the unrest that helped bring down 20 years of military dictatorship.
It was a time of real dictatorship. Those of us who were fighting for democracy, we felt like we were also planting socialism in Volta Redonda. And then in the 90s, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union, we, who were the most radical union in Volta Redonda, we started to think about where to go from here.
The collapse of the Soviet model and the government's own problems financing the plant forced the workers and bosses to get together. Privatization began painfully in 1993.
What really worried us was that with the privatization of CSN, 9,000 fathers were laid off. And where did they go?
About 1/3 of the 25,000 workers lost their jobs. But for those who remained, the plant was a very different place. Now the bosses seemed far less removed from the workers. Can you guess which one is the president? He's the second on the right, Silvio Coutinho, the first president who doesn't owe his position to political patronage.
Today, we have a professional partnership. It's a two-way street, built with respect and confidence. Our mission at CSN is to become the most competitive company of its kind in the world by the year 2000.
Modernization and a motivated workforce produced results. By 1993, CSN broke 28 production records, and what's more, many of the workers gained from shares that soared by more than 600%. Around the steelworks, building has surged, with new housing developments going up. José Ricardo Nogueira is one of those who benefited the most from privatization. Like other workers, he's seen his salary rise, in real terms, by about 80% in the past year. And so, the car, when will it come?
We want to build a wall here, a laundry area for my wife, then we'll think about the car. I think by the next holidays we'll have enough saved to buy a car.
Maybe if you look at it in an academic way, you may find that this model is just about perfect, even more so considering that at CSN they have reached a record production. But I refuse to look at it like this. I can't think only of the workers that stayed. I have to think about all the workers in a collective way. What we want is modernization and deep reforms, and a system that can create an environment that's able to absorb unemployed workers.
These concerns are widely felt in Volta Redonda. Outside the steelworks, many people are unemployed. But watching the huge blast furnaces at work and the optimism of the workers, it's difficult not to be impressed by the transformation. Moreover, CSN's been able to export worldwide and has positioned itself to take advantage of the extraordinary boom in the Brazilian car industry. Like North Americans, Brazilians have a love affair with their cars. And with the lifting of protectionism and the lowering of taxes, they are buying more cars than ever. Foreign investment has flooded in, and the world's major manufacturers are scrambling to use Brazil to reach the 200 million people in the South American market. Already, Brazil has overtaken Italy and Mexico to become the world's 10th largest auto manufacturer.
This is all Brazilian industry, all of this.
But it says Volkswagen.
Brazilian Volkswagen, and Brazilian Fiat, and Brazilian GM.
Talk to Brazilian industrialists about who understands the industry best, and their recommendations lead to one door in a quiet corner of São Paulo. José Mindlin is now 76 years old. He's an industrialist with wide-ranging interests. He has witnessed the enormous rises and falls within the Brazilian economy.
This tree, we had to cut down, I think, 25 or 30 years ago. And then it grew again, you see. That's Brazilian nature.
José Mindlin is recognized as one of the world's great book collectors. He has an elaborate sunken library. It's a collection that has been paid for by his genius in another area.
In 1950, when the Brazilian car market barely existed, José Mindlin founded Metal Leve, a small parts manufacturing company.
When we started, the only existing market was the replacement market. All the cars were imported. With the automotive industry, the market grew, but we were in a position to meet the requirements of this new market. In '63, Brazil exported $60 million of manufactured goods. Last year, Metal Leve exported $60 million.
From this plant, we're exporting products that take 2 years to be developed.
Sérgio Mindlin is José Mindlin's son. He's also the current president of Metal Leve. Like his father, he has long believed that the company shouldn't rely on domestic markets, but should compete globally. For years, they've invested 5% of the sales revenue on research, quality, and technology. Wise foresight in an age when car companies increasingly want parts manufacturers to take over research. Metal Leve's investment has paid handsome dividends. It supplies international companies such as Caterpillar, Fiat, and Mercedes-Benz. And over the last 7 years, the company has also opened factories in South Carolina and Indiana. They are well placed to compare American and Brazilian workers.
The Brazilian worker is very adaptable, and the work rules are much more flexible in Brazil than they are in the United States, and so that you can have people doing very different kinds of things in a much easier way. In the United States, these things have to be negotiated and established in a much more formal way.
But whether manufacturing in the US or Brazil, Sérgio Mindlin knows that challenges are increasingly global.
You have to have the right product at the right price at the right place. And everybody's trying to do that. So.
In this different and new world, what are your projections of growth?
The Brazilian automotive industry in '94 produced about 1.6 million vehicles. By the year 2000, the Brazilian industry could be between 2 and 2.5 million units.
Oh my God!
And
where are the streets for all these cars? It's traffic jam all over the place.
You'll have to decentralize the industry, and people will have to move to other cities, certainly. If you try to sell all those cars in São Paulo, we won't be able to move.
Is this normal, 3 o'clock in the afternoon?
In São Paulo, everything is normal. Anything is normal. Related to traffic, that's progress, they say. It's a huge country, but there are some certain distortions that happened in the last 30 years. For instance, 30 years ago, 70% of the population lived in the rural parts of the country. Now it's the opposite, 70% living in the big cities. And it's coming, that's what it became, unbearable. But one thing that annoys me more than the traffic is to go under an overpass and see the people sleeping rough and living rough. This annoys me much more than the traffic jam, because it's something that we've seen beginning and developing, and we could have acted before, and only now the elites and everybody's talking about the social debt. Or at least they are talking now.
The suffering in Brazil due to poverty is enormous. The loss to Brazil's economy from having so many marginalized people is impossible to estimate. At least 40 million people live outside the economy, neither able to buy products nor pay taxes. It's a great destabilizing force, and Brazil will never realize its full economic or social potential until they are brought into the marketplace. It's one of the biggest challenges facing Brazil today. But after years of political corruption and inefficiency, there are signs that the politicians are at last beginning to reach beyond the economic elite to a wider range of society.
The new is the part that isn't scared of competition or adventure. And the archaic is the old way of doing things, particularly in the political arena, the patronage, favoritism, anything that obstructs. Not being afraid to take things on, to compete, to move things forward, that's the new way. This depends on reorienting old ways of thinking.
When people speak of new ways of doing things, they often point to the south of Brazil, to Curitiba, the capital of Paraná. For a decade, Curitiba has been led by Governor Jaime Lerner. He's not a member of the president's party, but he's widely respected for his work in turning Curitiba into a model city.
I believe in local power. I think that it is the kind of power that can bring a lot of change to a country.
Lerner is an architect and urban planner, and he's constantly dreaming up new ideas and then designing them with his staff. Some characteristic scribbling, and an abandoned quarry is turned into an environmental university. Another quarry becomes an opera house, Ópera de Arame, which means opera made of wires, constructed in less than 3 months. And then there's Lerner's vision for reclaiming a garbage dump, a botanical garden that is reminiscent of Paris. Unlike many Brazilian leaders, Lerner has a reputation for not being interested in self-aggrandizement. Instead, he seems to be absorbed with Paraná's future.
This is the region that has the largest production of energy in the world, Itaipu. So most probably this will be an important region for continental development.
Paraná's economy is already growing at over 6% per year. But Lerner doesn't believe that it's doing enough to exploit its considerable natural resources. Today, he is arriving at a meeting with the private sector, corporate leaders that include the chairman of Volvo Brazil. He wants the businessmen to set up more manufacturing plants and to consider how they could take over traditional government tasks. Already, private enterprise and the government have developed a superb public transport system.
The state created the design and manages the overall system. But the buses themselves are run by private companies which buy the vehicles. We handle the route and the terminals, they handle the buses.
The collaboration works so well that people come from all over the world to study the system. Unlike in cities elsewhere, Curitibans don't buy their tickets on the buses, but beforehand, in the raised glass shelters. So when the bus arrives, they board swiftly, and the bus leaves within seconds. This, coupled with bus lanes, has resulted in a swift and popular commuter service. It carries as many passengers per hour as the New York subways. And what's more, tickets cost only 50 cents and are not subsidized. So many of Lerner's solutions are surprisingly simple, including one of Curitiba's most successful programs. Like other Brazilian cities, Curitiba is surrounded by growing slums, mainly due to the immigration of landless peasants overwhelmed by the mechanization of agriculture. In most cities, these people don't receive even the most basic city services, not even garbage collections. But in Curitiba, it's different. Every week, people in poor neighborhoods bring their garbage to collection points. In return, they are given food, which the city has purchased from local farmers, thus helping the farm economy. But doesn't this cost the city a fortune? No, the savings from the reduced garbage collections cover the cost of the food. So, as with the buses, everyone wins. For Jaime Lerner, it's all evidence that Brazil's most pressing problems can be tackled if the people's will can be harnessed to the extraordinary economic potential of the country.
I have no doubt that Brazil is an emerging power. Because in this country you always have a new frontier. Everything is possible. It's just a question of being confident. Now, this emerging power will only become a reality if we have an increase, a great advance, in what I call respect for the people. Because when the people of this country feel that they are respected, you won't be able to hold this country back.
You cannot talk of Brazil anymore of the country of the future. It's a country of the present, but with a brilliant future ahead.
We want a society that will provide security, school, housing, jobs. And I'm not thinking only about the people from Olodum or about my family. I'm thinking about everyone in this country.
And I wish I were 20 years younger to see Brazil 20 years from now. Because with all that has happened in the positive side in Brazil, still we are, in my opinion, on the brink of development. There is so much to do, so much that can be done.
Emerging Powers is supported by IBM.
And by the Ford Motor Company, where quality is job one.